Reincarnated Egyptian priestess helped archaeologists find a mysterious passageway by a previous life memory. Hello everyone, welcome to Broadview. My name is Joseph. Today we're going to be talking about another case of reincarnation. An article published in the New York Times in 1979 described the story of today's protagonist as one of the most intriguing and convincing cases of reincarnation in the West. This person is Dorothy Louise Eady. Dorothy was born in London in 1904. Her father was a tailor and her mother was a housewife. Although the family was not well off, her parents loved her very much as she was their only daughter. Unfortunately, she accidentally fell down the stairs of the house when she was 3 years old. The fall was so serious that Dorothy was knocked unconscious on the spot. Her parents rushed immediately to call the doctor, who arrived right away, but declared her dead, telling the family to prepare for Dorothy's funeral. An hour later, as the parents cried and prepared for the funeral, Dorothy suddenly woke up and began playing alone in bed as though nothing had happened. The doctor was shocked to see that, since he could have sworn to God that Dorothy had no vital signs at the time. Of course, they were absolutely thrilled that their daughter came back from the dead. The family was so overjoyed that they didn't notice some of the other things. But as time went on, Dorothy gradually began to show some unusual behavior. Soon after the accident, Dorothy's accent became very strange, like a foreigner speaking English. According to the diagnosis of doctors and experts, she was suffering from a condition called foreign accent syndrome, which was common among people with head injuries. But that wasn't the end of it. Dorothy told her parents that she kept having the same dream that she lived next to a building with big pillars and a very beautiful garden. However, she was only 3 or 4 years old at the time and couldn't quite tell what kind of place it was. Dorothy also often told her mother that the place where they lived now was not her home at all, and that the place in the dream was her real home. She kept insisting to her mother that she wanted to go back to her real home. At first, her mother was very calm and didn't think much of it. She assumed it was just her daughter's imagination. But then things got more and more out of control. One day, Dorothy's parents took her to the British Museum to visit a large exhibition of ancient Egypt. As soon as Dorothy entered, she was immediately captivated by it, especially when she saw the statues of the pharaohs and the pictures of the pyramids. She went crazy, running up to the statues and even kissing their feet. She cried hysterically, calling out, "Finally, I'm home! I'm home!" Her embarrassed parents, witnessing the spectacle, dragged Dorothy out of the museum with great difficulty. Since then, Dorothy became madly fascinated with Egyptian culture. When she was 7, she somehow got hold of a book about Egypt. She was fascinated by a picture of the temple of the Egyptian pharaoh Seti I. It looked just like the scene from her dream, a building with big pillars and what seemed to be ruins of a garden nearby. She exclaimed, "This is my own real home. I finally found it." There was also a picture of the mummy of Pharaoh Seti I in the book. When she saw it, she ecstatically said, "Ah, I've seen him. I've definitely seen him before." Dorothy's passion for Egypt was indescribable. Even boyfriends and marriage had to have something to do with Egypt. In 1931, at the age of 27, Dorothy married Iman Abdel Meguid, despite her family's objections. He was an Egyptian student studying in England. When he returned to his home country, Dorothy followed him. And once they arrived, that's when the really unbelievable occurrences started to begin. Memories of a past life. Dorothy's husband often woke up in the middle of the night to see Dorothy standing alone near the writing desk, writing notes by the moonlight. When her husband called out to her, she didn't answer. She just stood there, staring off into space. During the day, Dorothy would say that every night as she wrote, it felt as though she had been put under some sort of spell. It felt a bit like she was sleepwalking, actually. She was half asleep and half awake, and her body wasn't completely under her control. The contents of her notes were even more bizarre. She said that a god named Hora was calling out to her. She could only hear his soft, peaceful voice, but couldn't see the god. Every time, it was the god that woke her up on purpose and then asked her to write down the very little that he told her. These occurrences lasted for about a year. Dorothy ended up writing 70 pages of ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. Some of the symbols even she couldn't read. It was only after Dorothy put all the pieces together that she finally realized the god had been telling her about the memories she had from her previous life. Around 1900 BC, during the reign of the pharaoh Seti I, Dorothy was an Egyptian woman named Ben-Treshet. Her name meant harp of joy. Her father was a soldier and her mother was a fruit merchant. Since her mother died when she was 3 years old, there was no one to take care of her, so her father sent her to the temple in hopes that they would raise her as a priestess. According to the rules of the temple at the time, when a girl reached the age of 12, the high priest of the temple would give her two choices: either leave the temple and go out into the world alone, or become a holy virgin and live in the temple to serve the goddess Isis for life. Isis was the goddess of magic in Egyptian mythology. She had revived her husband Osiris, the god of the underworld, many times. Consequently, Isis was very popular with the pharaohs, because they also wanted to be revived by Isis after their deaths. Therefore, being a priestess of Isis was a very noble position. At that time, Ben-Treshet had no other choice, so she chose to stay as a priestess. But 2 years later, she met Seti I in the garden for the first time. It was love at first sight. Most deadly of all, the two tasted the forbidden fruit. Ben-Treshet became pregnant. Realizing this, the high priest became very angry and was going to interrogate her. To not get Seti I involved, she decided to commit suicide. Hearing this, you may be wondering, why would she have to kill herself if she was already loved by the pharaoh? The Egyptian hierarchy back then was different from nowadays. The priests held the greatest power because only they knew how to communicate with the gods. According to their rules, even the pharaoh couldn't have any relationship with a holy priestess who served God. This was considered blasphemous towards the gods, who were a higher power than royalty. That's why Ben-Treshet chose to commit suicide to protect the pharaoh. Her story drew a lot of attention after it became more widespread. Some people found it hard to believe and questioned the story's legitimacy. But the following series of incredible events gave people no choice but to believe in what Dorothy said. To verify that her words were true, Dorothy moved to Abydos, ready to be tested by the world. On one occasion, an archaeologist asked her to look at a mural in a dark room and identify landmarks from it. She easily identified all the known landmarks and even helped them identify some other ones that were still unknown. The archaeologists were shocked because the painting had not been shown to the public before. Yet her answers uncovered more than everyone else's dedicated research had. Scientists definitely weren't going to waste such an excellent resource. As a result, Dorothy was invited to work on archaeological and historical research projects. She also worked with many famous Egyptian archaeologists, such as Salim Hassan. She helped them with drawings, editing, translations, and interpreted many complex artifacts that even the greatest archaeologists of the time couldn't crack. Most importantly, she also provided them with archaeological tips. During the excavation of the Temple of Seti, she pointed to a spot and said that that was where the garden was located. Following this, the archaeological team really dug up the ruins of the garden, with the exact same layout as she had described. Another time she said that there was a secret underground tunnel in the north of the Temple of Seti. Archaeologists dug according to her advice and indeed found an underground tunnel. At first, people thought that she was just talking crazy. But the archaeologists who worked with her became convinced that she really was the reincarnation of an ancient Egyptian priestess. Besides the Temple of Seti, she also gave answers to some unsolved mysteries. These were also very surprising. For example, the tomb of Nefertiti. Nefertiti was the queen of the Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaten. She was considered the most beautiful Egyptian queen, and this is the only bust of Nefertiti we have today. She and her husband, Akhenaten, can be described as an enigma. This is what her husband looked like. He had a big long head and a big belly like an alien, and all sorts of deformities caused by inbreeding. Throughout the history of Egypt, pharaohs would ask craftsmen to make their statues beautiful. But Akhenaten was very unique. He asked the craftsman to carve according to his actual appearance. He believed that reality was the most beautiful. Sounds almost like he's the first realist artist in history. In addition, the queen usually had no real power, yet Akhenaten made his queen equal to him. She held the power of judgment just as her husband did. The two even carried out a religious reform, making the whole of Egypt worship only one god, Arden. Only they and their children could communicate with the god, thus weakening the power of the priests. Therefore, Nefertiti was not only the most beautiful woman in her time, but also one of the most powerful women in Egyptian history. Unfortunately, in the end their reform failed. Strange things then started to occur. Nefertiti suddenly disappeared from historical records without a trace. No one knows whether she was abolished or killed or met some other end. Up until today, no one has been able to find her tomb. She has become an unsolved mystery of Egyptian history. But in 1970, Dorothy claimed that the god of Hora had given her some clues. The god told her that the tomb of Nefertiti was in the Valley of the Kings where the pharaohs were buried, and that it was very close to the famous tomb of Tutankhamun. Dorothy was also certain that the tomb of Nefertiti was absolutely intact at the moment. Many archaeologists believe Dorothy must be talking nonsense this time. It was common knowledge that the Valley of the Kings was so conspicuous that it had attracted countless tomb robbers. Archaeologists had also combed through that place thoroughly, so how could the tomb of Nefertiti be there? Later, other archaeologists explored the tomb of Tutankhamun once again carefully, following Dorothy's clues. They unexpectedly actually found several hidden chambers. After scanning the tomb, they also found a secret passage behind the walls. Tutankhamun was the stepson of Nefertiti. Since she didn't have a biological son, she treated Tutankhamun as her own and loved him very much. Therefore, archaeologists believe that the passage very likely leads to the tomb of Nefertiti. Logically, the unsolved mystery would have been solved if archaeologists had dug down. But because the Egyptian Antiquities Department found that these archaeologists commonly stole and sold artifacts themselves privately, they prohibited the excavation work. If we want to learn the truth about Nefertiti, we have no choice but to wait for the excavation to start again in the future. Per Medjat. Dorothy also mentioned that she had learned from Seti I that there was a library underneath the Sphinx. It stored the important documents from the time of the ancestors, the oldest secrets of mankind. She wasn't the only one who spoke of such prophecies. The famous prophet Edgar Cayce also predicted that under the right front paw of the Sphinx there was a passage to a place where the records of human civilization were kept. No one believed this prediction at first. However, American archaeologist and geologist Robert Schoch and his research team later applied sonar technology and discovered that there really was a cavity under the right front paw of the Sphinx. Based on the sonar feedback, they confirmed that the cavity was definitely man-made, and that there was definitely something inside. But the Egyptian Cultural Administration refused any kind of exploration on the grounds of conservation. Dorothy passed away on April 21, 1981, leaving behind many clues that are yet to be discovered. The archaeologist Hani El-Zayini, who had worked with Dorothy for a long time, said Dorothy told him that her 70-page communication with Hora, as well as Seti I's collections of books, were now hidden somewhere in the temple of Seti I. They're simply waiting for people to discover them. So if you have the opportunity to go there in the future, don't forget to walk around. Maybe you'll be able to find these treasures. Skeptics are always cautious about such stories. However, many Egyptians are convinced that Dorothy was the reincarnated Bentrishit and had lived during the reign of Pharaoh Seti I thousands of years ago. She had the ability to clearly point out sites of ancient Egyptian gardens, identify landmarks in the dark room of the Seti temple that she had never visited, and know ancient Egypt in a way that even the best archaeologists and scholars couldn't. Some people might be able to fake the reincarnation stories, but how could Dorothy fake these abilities? Dorothy once said that no matter what attitude people held towards her stories, she was sure that before she died, she would be remembered by locals as a passionate woman who had owned the language and knowledge of ancient Egypt. Well, that's it for today. Please remember to click that subscribe button below so that you don't miss our next episode. Thank you all for watching. Have an awesome day.